We must begin at the beginning then. You must understand that there are approximately 350 specialists on the floor of the stock exchange. And they are divided into 55 specialist units. Now, these units handle anywhere from 10 to 80 stocks or more.
In a nutshell, there is an individual called the specialist who, at the same time he's allowed to invest for himself, is given the incredibly sensitive task of setting the price for the stocks that are assigned to him. This individual, the specialist, becomes a merchant. As a merchant, once he has inventory, his incentive becomes to sell that inventory at a profit. And so he will use his control over price to rally the issue. When he gets to a predetermined level, he will sell his stock. He'll distribute it. And then his warehouse is empty. His investment account or his trading account may have no inventory in it. When he wants to reacquire stock, of course he wants to do so at a lower price. And so he'll begin to drop the price after he's sold out his account. But the specialist never misses a chance to make a profit anywhere in this cycle. And so just as he made a profit accumulating and then distributing at a higher price, the specialist will sell short so that he can profit in the down part of the cycle.
Now, when you place an order to buy or sell stock, it goes from your broker to the specialist who executes it on your behalf. Now, when there is an order imbalance, he's supposed to supply that imbalance either by absorbing the stock or supplying that stock from his own account. Now, that would be fine if that was all there was. But what is in reality, in existence, is that he is in there trading for himself for his own movement of stock prices. Now, that's hard to believe. And so what I want to do is actually to document that kind of statement very quickly by just taking a couple of pages, a couple of sentences out of the special study report of 1963, which, in conjunction with Ferdinand Pecora's investigation of the stock exchange in 1933, is quite possibly the most important document, special study report of 63, that was ever produced about the stock market and the New York Stock Exchange.
What is commerce? Who here knows what commerce is defined as legally?
War.
No. No.
Buy and sell.
Yes, to buy and sell. It is not just to buy. It is not just to sell. It is not buy or sell, and that's what a lot of people want you to believe, because you go to the store, you bought something, they sold something, therefore the two of you engaged in commerce. That's bull. Neither of you engaged in commerce. If you plant a seed, say, if you plant some wheat, and you grow wheat, and you then collect that wheat, you take it to market, and you sell it. Have you engaged in commerce?
No.
No. You grew and sell. You did not buy and sell. If you then buy that wheat, and you use that wheat, and you mill it, so that now you have flour, and you sell the flour. You bought the wheat, sell the flour. Have you engaged in commerce?
Yes.
No. Commerce is two steps, buy and sell, not buy and do something else and then sell. You are adding value to it, and that added value means you are not engaging in pure commerce. The same as if someone takes the flour, turns it into bread, and sells the bread. Again, value has been added, and therefore it is not commerce. What about, though, if you live in a small village? You have someone growing wheat, someone milling flour, someone baking bread, everyone's happy. But some guy comes and he's got a lot of money. He buys up all the wheat, and all he does is buy it, and he doesn't do anything else. He doesn't mill it, he doesn't bake bread. Finally, everyone's starving. The guy says, fine, I'll sell my wheat now at a huge markup. All he has done is bought and sold and made a profit. That's commerce. That is why they can tax it, because it has the immense potential for harm. The guy with all the money will end up owning you. That's why it's taxable. That's why as a community you could say, okay, you want to do that, that's fine, but we get a portion of that.
Daar
Vanuit de
geregeld.
top wordt het geïnstrueerd. We hebben het net gehad over de gewone banken. Die hangen daar weer onder. Hè? En daaronder hangen nog de multinationals. En daaronder hangen de regeringen. En daaronder hangen wij, de mensen, het echte leven. En de mechanismes die ze dus gebruiken, dat is onder andere iets wat we heel normaal vinden. Dat is een rentecomponent. Geld wordt namelijk in deze samenleving gecreëerd op schuld, op een schuldcontract. Dus je hebt hier zeg maar een papier.
Ja.
Je gaat naar de bank, dat kennen we allemaal. Je vraagt een lening aan, een hypotheek. Je zet je handtekening. En op het moment dat jij je handtekening hebt gezet, wordt er aan de ene kant een schuld aangemaakt op de balans van de bank, op je rekening. En aan de andere kant een tegoed. Het tegoed gaat naar hetgeen wat je gaat kopen, het huis of de auto of wat dan ook. En de schuld blijft bij jou staan. Maar op die manier wordt er uit het niets digitaal geld gecreëerd. En dat is hoe al het geld op aarde gecreëerd is, op basis van een schuldcontract. Dat tot daaraan toe. Dat is een economie gebaseerd op schuld. Maar er zit ook een component aan, gebruikskosten zou je het kunnen noemen, rente. In de economie wordt je daarvan geleerd dat daar spaargelden tegenover staat. Dus dat iemand heeft er hard voor gewerkt, dus is het logisch dat hij wat krijgt voor het geld wat hij uitleent aan een ander. Nou, dat is allemaal niet waar. Het gaat erom dat die rentecomponent, zeg maar gemiddeld 5% per jaar, dat die niet is meegecreëerd in dat contract, in dat schuldcontract. Dat betekent dat dat ergens anders van een ander schuldcontract weggesnoept moet worden. En dat is het begin van een fundamenteel tekort wat je wereldwijd creëert, waarop iedereen met elkaar ook in competitie gaat, waaruit eigenlijk bijna alle ellende hier op aarde ontstaat onder de mensen in de samenleving. Want er wordt constant 5% gemiddeld aan de onderkant van de piramide naar boven getrokken, naar het kapitaal. En tel er maar door, hè. 5 maal 10 jaar is 50%, na 20 jaar is het al 100%. Dus er komen steeds grotere tekorten. Om dat op te lossen worden er dus steeds meer schuld op schuld contracten gecreëerd wereldwijd, ook onder banken, in alle lagen, regeringen, mensen, bedrijven, noem het maar op. Schuld op schuld, schuld op schuld, om die gaten van dat onttrekken, die 5%, dat vampirisme eigenlijk, hè, dat is het. Die echte waarde, die wordt onttrokken. En in 20 jaar heb je dus al 100% onttrokken. Dus je hebt steeds meer schuld. Daarom zie je ook staatsschulden steeds verder groeien. Je ziet overal eigenlijk iedereen steeds dieper in de schulden komen. Er komen steeds meer rapporten vrij. Dan komt een Oxfam Novib in één keer met een rapport, met een wereldwijd onderzoek. Dat blijkt dat 8 mensen wereldwijd al net zoveel bezitten als de helft van de wereld. Hoe kan dat? Dat is niet alleen met speculatie. Dat is ook door de rentecomponent. Dus de rentecomponent onttrekt alle reële waarde uit de economie en schiet naar boven. Aan de laatste over de piramide. Je hebt regels, wetten, legers, politiediensten, fiscaliteitsdiensten, noem ze allemaal maar op. Je hebt allemaal regels en wetten en organisaties aan de andere kant staan, die ervoor zorgen dat de onderlaag het echte leven daar blijft waar je hem wil houden. Dat niet iedereen straks boven zit. Dan zitten we met 7 miljoen boven en dat willen ze daar niet. Dus het is allemaal dichtgetimmerd. Zolang mensen niet beseffen hoe dit in elkaar zit en hoe ze belazerd worden, hoe ze bestolen worden, hoe de waardes, hun waarde, wordt onttrokken en waardoor rijk alleen maar rijk wordt. Zolang ze dat niet doorhebben, niet bewust worden daarvan.
Because in that way, citizen of the United States means you are an employee of a foreign corporation operating on international maritime law. So today, the President of the United States is the President of a privately owned company. The company is called United States. And the word President is always a word that is used in corporate law.
In this article called 2012 GOP Caucus Count Unresolved, it also confirms that 8 precincts were not reported. It says that they will never be certified. It says that we will never know who won. It also makes the amazing admission that for years the Iowa vote count was turned over to the Voter News Service. The Voter News Service replaced the News Election Service, and the National Election Pool, which works with Edison Research, is the latest version of that organization. It's a consortium of the television networks and the Associated Press. So what this article says, and this article was written by the Des Moines Register's chief political writer, is that in many years the tabulation for the votes in Iowa was handled by the media. That's what it says. Here's the 1996 note, quote, Republicans in Iowa decided to do no official party count. Instead, the tabulating was handled by the Voter News Service, which replaced the News Election Service. End quote. The Voter News Service again refers to the television networks and the Associated Press. So we have not free elections, we actually have the media controlling the elections. This is from the Des Moines Register's chief political writer. No wonder then that in most cases the media can declare a winner with 0% or 1% of the vote in, and so the whole thing is rigged, the whole thing is a hoax.
The Rothschilds' secret financial records were never audited and never accounted for. Their family commission biographies give the illusion that their family fortune has dwindled, but researchers estimate their wealth at close to $500 trillion, more than half the wealth of the entire world. Besides their many castles, palace mansions, wineries, racehorses, and exotic resorts, the Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s. Reuters then bought the Associated Press, which selects and delivers the same news stories to the entire world, day after day. They have controlling interest in 3 major television networks and easily avoid media attention since they own it. Until recently, they owned and operated England's Royal Mint and continue to be the gold agent for the Bank of England, which they also direct. They control the LBMA, London Bullion Market Association, where 30 to 42 million ounces of gold worth over $11 billion are traded daily. The Rothschilds earn millions weekly just on transaction fees alone. They also fix the world price of gold on a daily basis and profit from its ups and downs. Over the centuries, the Rothschilds have amassed trillions of dollars worth of gold bullion in their subterranean vaults and have cornered the world's gold supply. They own controlling interest in the world's largest oil company, Royal Dutch Shell. They operate phony charities and offshore banking services where the wealth of the black nobility in the Vatican is hidden in secret accounts at Rothschild Swiss banks, trusts, and holding companies. Pope Leo X rebuilt St. Peter's Basilica, selling tickets out of hell and tickets to heaven. During the Dark Ages, the Catholic Church not only hoarded the wealth they collected from the poor, but hoarded knowledge. They kept the masses ignorant and in the dark by denying them a basic education.
Since the Lehman crisis, the central banks have been carrying out so-called quantitative monetary easing. However, the vast sums being created as a result of this policy are being funneled only to financial companies controlled by Khazarian mafia honchos.
Imagine a world in which one of the things owned by a corporation was the song Happy Birthday. In fact, an AOL Time Warner subsidiary holds the copyright. In the past, it has demanded over $10,000 to allow you to hear anyone sing this popular song in a film. We didn't pay.
And together, they make up what could be the creepiest collection in the world.
Once you look at the devices, it's a very sobering moment.
From the interrogation chair to the infamous iron mask, it's chilling to know these torture devices were made after the Dark Ages.
If you were a blasphemer, that's when your tongue would be yanked.
The collection, which contains more than 250 items, will be put up for sale by Guernsey's auction house on the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
You look at some of these intricate little objects that on the surface have a certain charm to them until you realize what their purpose was, which was to cause great pain.
Little objects like the Spanish pear.
This brutal device was intended to be inserted into the mouth, have the handle turned, and these four items, these leaves would pop open
a mouth,
destroy your teeth, and pretty much destroy the inside of your mouth.
Or other body parts.
This was designed to fit over your hand like a glove, and the whole thing was then placed in hot irons.
Some of the items, like the torture table, have to be kept in a warehouse.
If the ropes weren't enough to stretch you out, there were big spikes in the middle that puncture you.
This is a Sumerian god known as Ishtar, or also Inanna, that came down, and there's actually a Sumerian tale of how Inanna liked to fly the skies of Earth, and one day she chose a Sumerian king, Gilgamesh, that she found attractive and wanted to take him up into her abode in the sky, and he said, "Thank you, but no thanks, because all the men that go up with you never come back and are turned up dead, so thanks, but no thanks." And this is an actual Sumerian tale that's, talking about Ishtar.
worldview look at this, because regardless of what people's spiritual beliefs are, for the listeners who aren't Christians, there still is a responsibility here to the truth. And the truth is that these people, this movement, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Biden, who I have video of, saying, "I'm a Zionist and I'm proud of it."
When I was a young senator, I say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
This movement is aligned against humanity, in my opinion. So
After they emerged from the ground, the bloodline of Zeus appointed Massa as guardian of their new territory. The people that worked under Massa to rebuild the new cities we now call Masons.
Massa owns this land over here. We met him in Oloraibi, and then he gave us permission to live here with him and give us this knowledge to take care of this world for him. So this really belongs to the Great Spirit, Massa.
European world, people farmed the land in a collective way because they saw it as a commons. It belonged to God. And then it was administered by the church, the aristocracy, and then the local manors as stewards of God's creation.
truth becomes clearer when we simply look at our current banking system. According to a report entitled The Federal Reserve Directors, a study of corporate banking influence conducted by the Committee on Banking, Currency and Housing, House of Representatives, in August 1976, it was concluded that all major financial banking cartels of the United States are all subsidiaries of the London Bank of England.
Report you should get from the library, UCLA library, the main library downtown. Page 142. It is evident specialists have the power to set and control prices unilaterally. The Los Angeles Times and the New York Times have never published that. They focused on other things about the SEC report, about mutual funds, about commissions. They left off everything that was important on behalf of their wealthiest advertisers. Well, when the SEC staff report came out and the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times said nothing about what was relevant to that study in terms of the specialist, I prepared my testimony, sent 7 copies off to the House Banking and Currency Committee, and was invited then to come and speak before the committee. I flew to Washington, and when I got there had been stories that an ex-actor was going to appear before the committee, and the room was filled. And I waited for my turn. Everyone was very gracious to the people who were speaking there that day. When I came to talk, led by Senator Jacob Javits, all the senators marched out. They'd read my testimony. They didn't want to hear me. They'd read everyone else's testimony. They listened to them, but they didn't want to hear me. Willis Robertson, who was the chairman, had to stay there. He retired later and became a lobbyist for the bankers, which he was when he was in Congress. Now, he told me, look, Mr. Ney, you don't have to read that. Submit it for the record. We all know what's in it. I said, Senator, I said, if you wanted me to submit it for the record, you should have called me in California. I've traveled 3,000 miles to read it. I'm going to read it. He protested, but I began to read. There was a little murmur of applause. They wanted to hear me. That's what they'd come for. And all during my testimony, you'd say, would you please hurry up? Would you please hurry up? This never happened before to anyone testifying before a committee. When I finished, he stalked off, and there was tremendous applause. The reporters from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, other papers came up and interviewed me. They congratulated me. They were ebullient. The following day, I was dismissed by the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal had the bad taste to insult me and to finish its comment by saying, it is unlikely Richard Ney will ever affect the course of securities legislation. That was probably the biggest mistake the Wall Street Journal ever made on behalf of the New York Stock Exchange. Because I was determined to prove them wrong. They were right. But fortunately, I didn't know that. I thought I could prove them wrong.
Buzzy Krongard, the former executive director of the CIA, just happened to be the manager of Deutsche Bank. And so the profiteers from 911 were not Osama bin Laden or his band of U.S.-trained Arabs. They were blue-chip Israeli, U.S., and British businessmen. Within the first week, the 911 producers sucked up $40 billion in box office profits from U.S. taxpayers who were hypnotized, terrorized, and traumatized by the infinite reruns.
Well, of course. That meant that they were bypassing the banksters of the private bankers of the Bank of England completely. And so the Bank of England, of course, put pressure on Parliament in London to pass the various laws that basically meant, the Stamp Act and so on and so forth. And as part of these laws, they also prohibited the colonies from issuing this currency.
Since the Lehman crisis, the central banks have been carrying out so-called quantitative monetary easing. However, the vast sums being created as a result of this policy are being funneled only to financial companies controlled by Khazarian mafia honchos.
Oh, heavens, no. You point out Kennedy's executive order, I think it was 11,110 in your book Crossfire. Mm-hmm. And if I recall correctly, Jim, in Crossfire, you mentioned that Kennedy, in that executive order, which was signed in June of 1963, right, and that this order was to circulate $4 billion and a few $100-odd million worth of United States notes into circulation. Well, I remember spending some of those United States notes as a child.
Hash of documents that exposes the complex trails that the elite around the world use to hide their money, and it doesn't just expose it. It doesn't just expose the patterns. It exposes a lot of very particular people.
And I want to ask you about that, Ryan. Here's the headline right now, and you can go into the resource well. We're going to push it into the resource well right now, so you can all go and take a look at the article. Secret Files Expose Offshore's Global Impact. What are the ramifications, Ryan? I'll ask you about some of the bold-faced names in a minute, but what are the ramifications of this information coming out into the public domain?
The best you could hope for is that this embarrasses enough governments that they get together and do something about it. Offshore tax havens are an existential threat to governments as we know them. The way and the speed with which you can move capital around the globe undermines governments' abilities to fund themselves. It's as simple as that. Right now, the United States government and other governments are able to collect enough revenue from their populations to function, but as inequality continues to yawn and wealth continues to roll up to the top, and the top 1% continue to find these ways to hide their money, then that fundamentally changes the government's ability to offer basic services as it does today. So cracking down on this is genuinely an existential question for governments around the world.
Who are some of these bold-faced names, Ryan, that stuck out to you in the reporting from the investigation?
Well, they found Mark Rich's wife, with
Denise Rich,
something like $144 million stashed in the islands. He's the one that famously lobbied for a pardon for himself and got it, though. You have Imelda Marcos's relatives. So, the government there wants to know, what was this money that was stolen from the people? You have a ton of Russian oligarchs who are stashing their money there. More than 100,000 individuals, which is getting pretty close to not all of the people who are in this category, but it's a surprisingly small number of people who own an extraordinary amount of the globe's wealth. And so if you've snared 100,000 plus of them, that's a significant chunk of all of the people who are operating in this way.
To issue debt-free money, what often happened as a result was that the temple became more or less the de facto state bank, because the temple added the probity, or the sanction, if you will, of the gods or of religion to the issuance.
God ordained us to be in charge of the money.
Number 21. The British Mint recently printed legal tender coins called the One True Ring and the Ring of Power. On one side of the coin is Queen Elizabeth II. On the flip side is the ring from Lord of the Rings. These legal tender coins printed by the British Mint raise the disturbing question, who is the real Lord of the Rings?
One ring to rule them all.
The inscription on the ring reads, "One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness of their ignorance, bind them."
secret societies, because there were many that were looking, like I was saying, the Nazis. We really go back to the Thule Society.
Yeah. Madame I can't say her name, Blavatsky and such. Yeah. So what gets me, though, is that you wind up with whatever it is they want to build and punch a hole or wherever, but you don't know what could come out the other side where you are. I mean, that's what kind of flips me out.
Well, let me show you where some of these theories have led.
Okay.
Because as I have found, each of these people involved in these situations are practicing Kabbalists, such as Paul Laffoley, and many in the space program, like Jack Parsons, who founded Jet Propulsion's laboratory.
Yeah, they joke and say, they joke around and say the JPL stands for Jack Parsons Lab.
Yeah, and he has a crater on the dark side of the moon, right? These are no small people, and they practice a form of magic known as Kabbalah, which actually goes back to ancient Egypt, but it's traditionally classified as a Hebrew mysticism.
Isn't it interesting how all the secret societies and clubs, occult clubs, are in roughly the same area in Washington, D.C.? Whatever's Egypt got to do with the United States of America? Well, as my time in America was drawing to a close, I decided to head into Washington, D.C., into one of the most renowned parts for Illuminati operations. There's quite a lot going on around here, you know. It's no coincidence that these are all pentagrams, because we're right outside the International Eastern Star headquarters, which is the female version of Freemasonry. Green Man, Sonunos. So it's strange, it all seems to be in one area, and it's a very privileged area of Washington, D.C. Freemasonic symbolism that surrounds Washington, D.C. is absolutely undeniable. But today I was hoping to get a peek into a very specific place that lies right in the very heart of the capital city.
Well, there's your link to ancient Egypt. These are the secret societies, my friends.
Absolutely astounded to see that practically everything that we expose here on RSE had its place on the bookshelf of this Freemasonic library.
Washington, D.C. is a Masonic city. It's laid out by a Masonic call. Every building is laid with its foundation stone by Freemasons. Freemasonry is Judaism for the Gentiles.
As I said, I was talking about these subjects back in 1962, before most of the people who now talk about it were even still in school. So consequently, I've looked at many different areas of conspiracy since that time. And I'm appalled at what I see happening in this country today. We are told that America is the land of laws, a nation built on laws. In point of fact, nothing could be further from the truth.
What is it that you'd like to see happen about all this?
Oh, I want to see those criminals forever after bars.
Yeah. You haven't received any help, though, from within the Netherlands, you said.
Not one thing, and no, it is terrible. From 2004 on till now today, I have spoken with every policeman I could find. Spoken with every law official I could find. I've talked to Interpol about this. I've been to court to try to get a conviction of the prosecutor to investigate the matter. The court told me that it wasn't my problem. It was a problem of the society, and the court didn't want to give an order to the prosecutor to investigate. I have done literally everything to clear this up. I haven't. No, I have the idea that everything is stopped because Beatrix is involved.
Right.
And the Dutch court is involved. And every time some policeman wants to investigate, they slap him on the shoulders and say, don't do that because Queen Beatrix doesn't want it.
Keanu Reeves talking about, and this is a column, I just read the column, Keanu Reeves went over to one of these moguls' houses and they were talking about drinking blood, opens the fridge up and has 2 dead babies, one in the fridge. And Keanu Reeves breaks the dude's nose, busts a lot of crap in his house, calls the cops, and the cops don't do a damn thing. They act like he's crazy. Well, if you believe that shit, that the that the cops are just not going to do anything, you're correct, because they're in on it. If you don't believe Keanu Reeves, I mean, why would he make that shit up? He's living overseas now. Company making motorcycles. He wouldn't make this stuff up. That's kind of like a death threat. I mean, he can't even come back to the United States.
Brothers and sisters who are in America, and also for everyone around the world, as it does actually affect everybody, this information. Just a brief history on it. In 1948, a law was passed in America which said that the American governments couldn't use propaganda against their own people. And that was an act that was made, and it was very specific, and it said the government cannot use propaganda against its own people to, go with their own, to change their laws and to do specific things. This was an actual law that was passed. Okay, just some information that I've got, and I don't know how many people know about this or know that it's been passed, but in May of 2012, last year, a Texan Republican called Thornberry introduced the HR 5736, the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012. Just going to explain to you what the act is, and then I'm going to read briefly a piece that I've found which explains rather well about it. Now basically what this act is back in 1948, after the wars, the American people started to wake up, just like they are today, and they started to realise that the governments are actually using propaganda against them to get what they wanted. So they were putting out false stuff, and just, the people at that time were actually sick and tired of it. So this bill was introduced so that it couldn't be done anymore against the people and against the world as well. But in May of 2012, that law was actually amended. I don't know how many people know about this. Now, it was amended in such a way that I find it really shocking, especially in light of what's happening at the moment with the Sandy Hook. And all those things there. So basically I'm going to give you a brief rundown of what the new law now has added to, what has been added to it. So what they've added to it is that the government in America has power over the broadcasting in America. They are allowed to put their own information, to disseminate information. They're allowed to use they're allowed to use the press. They're allowed to use publications. They're allowed to use the radio. They're allowed to use motion pictures. They can put their propaganda over the internet. They're allowed to use other information media, including social media, and through information centers, instructors, and other direct or indirect means of communication. And also what they're going to be doing, they've also changed the act to say that the people who put all this stuff into the archives are just putting it straight into the archives, which means that propaganda and, lies that the government is telling is then being put into the archives. Basically what this means, people, is for anything that the government want to do and they want to change, they're going to be using every format available to them to change your mind about an issue. For instance, what's going on today with the Sandy Hook? Now, reading this and knowing that they've got full, they've got full power over all broadcasting, filming, okay, they can make films if they want to, right? They can go onto social media sites if they want to. So for those of you that know about the video that I've put up about the YouTube videos that are on a hit list, that are talking about Sandy Hook and the cracks in the official narrative, it's the government that wants them off YouTube, because we are actually messing up their propaganda. So there's a hit list at the moment for videos that are on YouTube, and they want them off because it's messing up all this stuff that they're trying to do. Obviously they're trying to take the guns off you guys in the USA, and they're using any means and forms that they need and they deem necessary, and that's what they're doing. And also it's changing history, because if you're putting false stuff into the archives, you know, in 100 years' time, people are going to be reading that stuff. It's going to be available. And who in 100 years' time is going to know the truth about what was really going on in the world? And the fact that governments had to make films to try and change our minds. You know, they made movies, and they were on the radio, and they were infiltrating our social media. So for people that say that there aren't government trolls online, and they say they're not, there aren't people that are doing that, and when we are calling them government shills and everything, look, the internet, they've infiltrated it. Social media sites, they have full power. So this was brought in May 2012. So you've got June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So we had 7 months after, you got the Sandy Hook happening. So this was rather, I think this was changed rather deliberately, because they knew what was coming up.
So the concept behind Stargate, and realize that at the end of every Stargate episode, they state, "We greatly acknowledge the cooperation of the United States Space Command."
Right. There is such a thing.
And, of course, the Department of Defense and the United States Air Force. So, you know, these are the creative geniuses behind the television series, right? It's written by the military, for the programming of the public.
Now, there's a lot of history behind Makanda, and it had many names in the past. But one thing is certain. The village was incorporated in 1888. And it was first called Markanda, or Markans, Markata. These were iterations of this name with the word Mark in it. And of course, when you look at Mark the Evangelist, Saint Mark, they talk about the Church of Alexandria in Egypt, which he founded. Now they want you to think that all this is by accident. But it is not, and that's where free thought comes in. Yes, Saint Mark was the patron saint of Egypt, the Church of Alexandria.
Darwin predicted the fossil record would present a smooth and gradual transition from one kind of organism to another, but instead we find sudden appearances of fully developed organisms. Not only are they not finding these quote-unquote missing links, they're actually finding new chains altogether. Even more damaging to the evolution theory than that, though, is a little thing called carbon-14. Now, radioactive carbon is like an hourglass that is inside all living things. But once an organism dies, the sand in the hourglass begins to run out. This is called radioactive decay. Nothing on Earth can stop it. And we know that carbon-14 has a short half-life. In layman's terms, we know that it is impossible for any trace of carbon-14 to last more than 100,000 years after something dies. So since evolutionists think fossils are millions of years old, they predicted that fossils cannot contain any trace of carbon-14. However, in recent years, the accelerator mass spectrometer has made it possible to measure trace amounts of carbon-14. Of course, many fossils are completely mineralized with no traces of the original carbon, let alone radioactive carbon. Nevertheless, there is a great deal of unmineralized fossil material being found, including such material as crude oil, coal, diamonds, and even dinosaur bone marrow. So what do we find when these things are tested? If you haven't already guessed, carbon-14 is present in all of these things, even diamonds. Folks, fossils are much younger than they've been telling us. And now, every AMS lab in the world has the proof. Testing labs all over the world are finding carbon-14 throughout the fossil record, from top to bottom, even after carefully filtering out potential contamination. This is conclusive proof that everything on Earth is less than 100,000 years old. So this brings us to our next topic. What about all the different dating methods that they have used to conclude that these fossils are millions of years old? Well, the first thing that you need to keep in mind is that these dating methods that they speak of, like carbon dating, potassium-argon dating, and so on and so forth, are not actually used to age fossils. The so-called geologic column is what is used to date fossils. The funny thing is, fossils are used to date the geological column, which is obviously circular reasoning and doesn't make any sense, but nonetheless, evolutionists do sometimes refer to these other dating methods, regardless of whether or not you're talking about carbon dating, uranium, thorium, lead dating, rubidium, strontium dating, potassium, argon dating. No matter which dating method you're talking about, they all make wild assumptions on the side of evolution. Let me give you a comparison. All of these dating methods are equivalent to this. Say I had a burning candle that was 8 inches tall and was burning at a rate of 1 inch per hour. If I were to then ask you, when was the candle lit, you would have to make some assumptions. That is essentially exactly how all of these different dating methods work. The scientists that use these dating methods make wild assumptions that cater to the evolution theory. This is important to realize because when they date a fossil using the numbers predicted using the evolution theory, if they were to calculate a number less than what they would expect to corroborate the widely accepted theory of evolution, they throw it out. Folks, the ultimate result in all of this is basically that all these different dating methods are completely and utterly useless. They are equivalent to making up a number off the top of your head. Now you can research this topic more and I encourage you to do so. And you will find people who have taken fossils in to be dated by experts only to get back wildly different numbers. It is completely and utterly unreliable. Now the last thing that I want to bring up while we are still on the topic of fossils is that fossilization does not necessarily take millions of years, despite what you may have been told. In fact, in the laboratory, Under perfect conditions, fossilization can occur in as little as a week. So no, it does not necessarily take millions of years for things to fossilize.
Steve, in your book True Legends, you talk about a Smithsonian cover-up whenever giant bones are involved. So I want to ask you the question that everybody always asks. Where are all the giant bones?
It's interesting, Tim, because of the bias of the Smithsonian and their contempt for out-of-place artifacts. Every time giants were found, it didn't matter if it was on the West Coast, the Arctic, the Antarctic, believe it or not, the East Coast, the Ohio River mounds, they always have a fabulous cutoff point, meaning once the Smithsonian is notified and those bones are sent to the Smithsonian, they're never heard from again. And there's denials. A good example of that, it was a famous Kincaid expedition to the Grand Canyon, where they found the Egyptian citadel. Even the Phoenix Gazette carried that story. So, Tim, the cover-up has always been to keep this biblically relevant topic out of the minds of the people, so at an appropriate time in the future, they can claim whatever they want to claim, and they'll claim anything and everything apart from the true biblical origin of giants.
Oh, absolutely. And when you take a look at what was created at the same time Zionism was, I think it was the ADL, Anti-Defamation League. Mm-hmm. That's a Rothschild creation, and it was done so that nobody would be allowed to question the Zionist movement or its falsity. And that's why you see something like the Southern
Poverty Law Center.
Yeah, Poverty Law Center. Those are all Rothschild creations meant to stem and keep away investigations, research, and revelations of what they're doing behind the scenes.
This government has been working overtime to take away our rights to common law through many pieces of legislation. Common law is what guarantees us an ability to correct injustices.
We see things like the warning from Tom DeLay, for instance, saying that the Department of Justice of the United States wants to legalize 12 perversions, including bestiality and sex with children. And then what do we see with the Pizzagate and the Pedagate scandals, which I have been saying and will continue to say are the key. Pizzagate is the key to bringing these people down, because Pizzagate is very real, and it leads us to Pedogate, which is the global pedophilia ring.
Consequently, since 1868, we're now on the International Maritime Admiralty Law.
Welcome back to WHDT World News. I'm Gary Franchi, and joining me now is whistleblower from the World Bank, Karen Hudes. We're going to bring you the conclusion of yesterday's interview. Karen, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Karen, when we concluded yesterday's interview, we were discussing, or you had brought up the new Constitution that was instated in the United States. So is the Constitution that we know today in effect, or is there a different Constitution that you claim?
Unfortunately, we are being snookered by the Congress because every 2 years they reintroduce a state of martial law. And we are not under our first Constitution. We are under this second secret Constitution. What that Constitution provides is that our tax dollars are going to pay interest to the Federal Reserve. They're not paying for any of the services that we need in our country. The federal courts, the judges, are not sitting there in courts of equity. They're secretly treating us as if we are property of the United States. When we come in there, we are not there in a court of equity. So yes, it is a different arrangement with our government.
This secret Constitution, is it really more of a corporate document?
What it means is that when you go to court to protect your rights, you don't even get to first base because that judge is not sitting in what you call a court of equity. They're not looking at you as if you're a citizen of the United States. They're handling you as if you're a person who's just servicing the debt of the United States. You're there as a thing.
So if you're just a thing in a courtroom that's servicing debt, I mean, what does that make every American citizen?
It takes away all of our rights.
So Americans don't have any rights?
Americans need to take back their rights because our founding fathers were very clear about that. We were in a country that had consent of the governed. We were in a country that could bear arms, had the right to bear arms. They understood that we were a liberty-loving people. And actually, the fate of the world is riding on whether we have remained that. And I think we have.
Although Cleopatra is considered to be the last of the Egyptian pharaohs, author Ralph Ellis claims that Jesus was the last of the Hebrew pharaohs of Egypt. Jesus, a pharaoh? How is that possible? The historical facts show that the last pharaoh of Egypt was Ptolemy XV, who was nicknamed Caesarion or Little Caesar. Born in 47 BC, Caesarion was the son of two of the most famous parents in world history, Roman ruler Julius Caesar and Egyptian pharaoh Cleopatra. When Caesarion's mother, Cleopatra, proclaimed herself to be the reincarnation of the virgin goddess Isis, Caesarion became the son of a virgin mother goddess. When Caesarion's father, Julius Caesar, was elevated to the status of god by the Roman Senate, Caesarion was recognized as the son of God and heir to God's kingdom, the Roman Empire.
But tonight, I'm talking about those children removed from their homes intentionally for profit. Children are seized unnecessarily from their families due to the federal aid created in 1974 entitled the Adoption and Safe Families Act. It offers financial incentives to the states that increase adoption numbers. To receive the adoption incentives or bonuses, local CPS must have more children They must have more merchandise to sell. Funding is available when a child is placed in a foster home with strangers or placed in a mental health facility and medicated, usually against the parents' wishes. Parents are victimized by the system that makes a profit for holding children longer and bonuses for not returning children to their parents. This is abuse of power. It is lack of accountability. And it is a growing criminal political phenomenon spreading around the globe.
Het raakt mij ook, maar oké. Kun jij vertellen wat het ergste is wat je hebt meegemaakt, waardoor je zegt, en daar was voor mij gewoon toen
Nou, dat is dus het breekpunt geweest. Je komt zo diep in die kringen. Je tekent ook eigenlijk ik heb niet met bloed getekend ergens voor, maar je tekent wel een contract voor je leven dat je zwijgt over namen van bedrijven, organisaties, personen. Dat is ook de reden waarom ik denk nog steeds leef. Je houdt je daaraan. Maar als het gaat om de meest erge dingen die ik heb meegemaakt. Ik heb net verteld over dingen waar ik stroomstoringen mee kreeg. Het geweten begon dus. Laten we het zo zeggen, ik zat in een opleiding tot psychopaat en ik ben gezakt. Ik heb het niet gehaald, ik ben geen psychopaat geworden. Dat geweten brak door. En het ergste wat mij overkomen was, dat was omdat ik zo'n goed aanzien had, zo succesvol was en zo vertrouwd was met mensen in deze wereld die dus op dat niveau speelden. Ik moet ook zeggen dat de meeste van deze mensen hadden een geloof wat afwijkt van het gemiddelde. Hè? Je hebt katholieken, je hebt protestanten, je hebt allerlei soorten van religies. Deze mensen, de meeste daarvan, hadden een Luciferiaans geloof. En dan kan iedereen zeggen, ja, geloof bestaat niet en God bestaat niet, alles bestaat niet. Nou, voor die mensen was het de waarheid en de werkelijkheid. Hun diende dus iets onstoffelijks. Hun diende wat zij noemden Lucifer. Mm-hmm. En ik kwam dus ook in die kringen. Alleen ik lachte erom, want het waren voor mij gewoon klanten. Dus ik kwam in wat ze noemden Satanskerken.
Ik wou zeggen, we hebben het nu over het satanisme.
Ja,
okay.
Ik kwam dus in Satanskerken, maar ik kwam zeg maar op route even langs, even buurten. En daar was dan op dat moment een heilige mis, hun heilige soorten mis. En dat was met blote vrouwen en wat drank en dit en dat. En ik vond het alleen maar leuk. Hmm. Ik hechtte weinig of geen geloof aan hun geloof. Of ik was er eigenlijk niet eens van overtuigd dat het überhaupt allemaal wel bestond.
Het was meer een schouwspel voor jou?
Ja, ik zag gewoon de donkerte en de slechtheid en de diepte daarvan zit in de mens zelf.
Ja.
Ik koppelde het nog niet zo. Maar ook die kringen verkeerde ik dus in, omdat ja, als gast zeg maar, omdat ik vond het allemaal wel leuk. Al die blote vrouwen en al die dingetjes die daar speelden. Het was het vrije leven. Maar er kwam een moment, toen werd ik dus uitgenodigd, daarom vertel ik dit ook, om mee te gaan doen aan offers in het buitenland. Dat was het breekpunt. Kinderen.
Oké. Dat werd je gevraagd?
Ja, ik kon het niet.
So talk about Yosemite for a minute. How many people have ever been there? So if you ever go to the States, it's one of those stops you got to have. It is a beautiful place. Just walk arm in arm. So Half Dome, kind of the cornerstone of Yosemite, we'll show to you later. It's solid granite, 5,000 feet tall. The tallest waterfall in the U.S. is in Yosemite. They have 500 giant sequoia trees. That's something else you have to see. They're beautiful. They're thousands of years old. They have 300 black bears in the park. UNESCO made this a World Heritage Site in '84. It's about 3.5 million visitors per year and established October 1st, 1890. A couple of things that people bring up to me is the UNESCO site. Because in different parts of the world, there are these clusters of disappearances at these UNESCO sites, which is a little odd.
Number 15. Incest was practiced by ancient Egyptian royalty. Mothers married sons and brothers married sisters to keep the power and the money all in the family. Like their pharaonic ancestors, the British monarchy have a long history of incestuous inbreeding.
Also, what we find at these sites, and we find them actually at all of the megalithic, which means massive stone sites in Peru and Bolivia, are these strange elongated skulls. And the problem is that this display, for example, which is at Tiwanaku, has been shut down. You're not allowed to look at the skulls anymore. That could be conspiracy, but no one has ever carbon dated these skulls, and no one has ever DNA tested these skulls, but the archaeologists automatically assumed that these people, or some would say beings, were directly responsible for these constructions, and that is insufficient. Even the Inca people are always portrayed like this. They are very Indian looking, they have long black hair. The problem is that when the Spanish arrived in Peru, and the reason why they were able to overtake the Inca was the Inca were involved in a civil war at the time, and almost the entire royal population, who were the actual Inca. The Inca was not the population, it was the royal family. They had been exterminated. So this is what Spanish portrait painters interpreted as being what the Inca looked like, and Peruvians to this day think that that's what they looked like, but we don't honestly know.
Ultiem geworden. Maar dat is allemaal omdat de mensen, zeg maar, niet opstaan. Nee. Niet beseffen wat de werkelijkheid is.
En geprogrammeerd zijn, want durf maar eens te zeggen dat je tegen het sionisme bent, dan ben je antisemiet, dan ben je... dat proberen ze...
Het negatieve, je mag zeggen het kwaad, het Luciferiaanse, het satanisme, hoe je het wil noemen. Het is een werkelijke entiteit. Ik ben werkelijk erachter gekomen dat wat ook in zo'n Bijbel staat, en het staat niet alleen in de Bijbel, het staat in zoveel boeken. Er is werkelijk een shift geweest, een afscheiding geweest van de lichtmanifestatie, waarin eigenlijk een club voor zichzelf is begonnen en een haat, een intense haat heeft, een kwaadheid heeft, die maar heel weinig mensen werkelijk op waarde durven in te schatten, want het is een allesvernietigende kracht die ons haat. Ja. Die haat de schepping, die haat het leven. En zal er ook alles aan doen om ons mensen te vernietigen. En hoe doe je dat? Door ze uit elkaar te houden. Verdeel en heers, dat klopt. De mensheid is namelijk de manifestatie van het licht. Dat is de werkelijke creatie. Zolang je die maar gescheiden houdt in allerlei zaken, zoals politieke partijen, kleurtjes waar we op afgerekend worden, noem alles maar op. Dan zorg je ervoor dat jouw grootste vijand, vanuit het Luciferiaans gezien, niet tot zijn volle potentie komt, niet tot zijn volle kracht komt. Niet kan gaan staan, want op het moment dat dat gebeurt, dan verdwijnt het. Dan verdwijnt die hele brulboei, dat monster, het monster van meer, die verdwijnt.
Is Charlie Manson crazy?
Well, whatever that means. Sure, he's crazy as mad as a hatter. What difference does it make? You know, a long time ago, being crazy meant something. Nowadays, everybody's crazy. So, I mean, you know, like, you know, synonymous. I mean, it's an irony, man. It's a pair of ducks. I mean, are you crazy? Dressed in black? You think I don't know everything that goes with that black you're dressed in? Yeah. I didn't step out of line with God, and I didn't step out of line with the man. I did not break the law. You understand what I'm telling you? The Second World War is not over. You guys live in the overworld. I live in the underworld.
Bills as in dollar bill? No, a bill as in an order to pay.
they resort to massive counterfeiting. All right? In other words, they simply counterfeit that currency, whatever it may be, if it's cuneiform clay tablets or Lincoln
dinars or whatever.
Yeah, or Lincoln greenbacks, whatever. You know, they simply resort to massive counterfeiting efforts in an effort to crash the currency. And then they do something else. They take out of circulation any legitimately state-issued money. In other words, they take out of circulation the one form of currency and then substitute their own. And by these combined efforts, what they're really doing is saying, see, our stuff is much more stable than your stuff. Now, Jim, this has happened over and over again in history.
Right.
In the American Revolution, the Bank of England had literally created and set up a bunch of counterfeiters in the American colonies that were counterfeiting colonial scrip to crash the colonial currency on the one hand, and on the other, they were trying to remove as much of it as possible from the legitimate stuff from circulation and substitute their own Bank of England pound notes, all right? And again, we see the same thing happen after President Kennedy issues that executive order, and a few of those debt-free United States notes get into circulation. Well, what does the Federal Reserve do whenever they get any of those in their banks? They simply remove them from circulation.
That's right. And by the way, to the best of my research, that executive order of Kennedy's has never been rescinded. It has just been ignored.
Exactly. Just ignored.
Go into more detail about it. Now, if we're going to open gateways, modern science tells us that in order to do that, we need what's called a particle accelerator. And I believe I found evidence of an ancient particle accelerator, and that's what I want to talk about now for the next few minutes. The Tower of Babel, we're told, was modeled after the ancient cosmic axis, which was called Meru. Meru. Meru is the ladder to heaven, the cosmic axis, the stairway to heaven, and this is a diagram of Meru from a 2nd century Chinese manuscript. Not only was Meru the basis for the Tower of Babel, but Sumer itself was named after it. Sumer was called Sumeru. Meru, of course, is spelled M-E-R-U, and what we saw earlier was this Mer device spelled M-A-R that looked like some kind of well, it's described as a spade, but it looked like some kind of a vehicle ascending. I think the diagram is actually referring to this device right here, the Meru cosmic axis. Again, coming from a 2nd century Chinese manuscript. This has been a very intriguing diagram to me for a number of years, and when we follow the more detailed path of it, we see what appears to be almost like a vertebrae system. It looks strikingly similar to a human vertebrae system, among other things. At the apex of this Meru pillar is a triangle, or a pyramid, which is symbolic of a place called Shambhala, which was the name of the place where this Meru pillar was originally located, Meru being the name of the center of Shambhala, and Shambhala being the name of the place of also known as the realm of the immortals, the home of the immortals. Now, Shambhala is one of those really funny words because it has within it words we've already discussed tonight, including Shem, which Sitchin identifies as the shining fiery stone, specifically the capstone to a pillar. And Sitchin identifies this as the craft of the Anunnaki. Shem is the root of our word shaman and also of Shambhala, the realm of the immortals. I was researching this whole Shambhala business a number of years ago and giving a presentation on it. And a scientist came up to me after this one particular presentation, and he said, I was basically asleep through your presentation until you put up that blueprint. And I said, what blueprint? And he went through my slides until he came to this diagram right here. And he said, that blueprint right there. And he proceeded to tell me that he designed particle beam weapons for a living, you know, Star Wars type weapons. And he said, do you realize that this right here is a blueprint for a particle accelerator? He said, here's the weapon system right here. It's designed to rotate on this platform, and this is the pulse emanating from the weapon. The reason why it looks like a sword is because this is, in fact, a weapon system that you're looking at. And the question is, what was it doing in a 2nd century Chinese manuscript? So I took the scientist bait and I came home and I consulted God or a form of God, Google, and I typed in particle accelerator. And here came Ernest Lawrence's diagram of the particle accelerator that was used in the splitting of the atom. And when I compared it with the base of the Meru diagram, I can see exactly what that scientist was talking about. There is a pretty interesting correspondence between this modern particle accelerator and this ancient diagram. And the question is, how does that happen? I mean, is it possible that this 2nd century Chinese manuscript featured a blueprint for a particle accelerator? Just exactly the device that you need in order to open a wormhole in space? And this diagram, again, is the model or possible model upon which the Tower of Babel, the gate, is based. Paul Davies, writing in Scientific American, theorizes that one day we will be able to build giant space-based particle accelerators that open wormholes. And when I look at the two, I sort of see a correspondence. I think that maybe this is, in fact, a blueprint for an ancient particle accelerator.
Number 22, the covenant that the biblical God gave to Abraham was a promise to make his name great and to make for him a great nation. Today, Great Britain is the only nation called great. In Hebrew, the word Britain literally means land of the covenant, and British means man of the covenant. How on earth did the Hebrew throne of ancient Egypt and Canaan end up in Great Britain under Queen Elizabeth II?
And if you take a look in the 20th century, this era started around 1910, 1913. Well, what happened in 1913? Not only did we have the Federal Reserve, the central banks, and all that, but we also had the lead up to World War I, which led, of course, to the Balfour Agreement, the breaking up of the Ottoman Empire, so all these nation states. All these things were set because of the Zionist movement at about the same time.
Manhattan, who said, who as it turns out, after the case was thrown out, it turns out that the judge's husband is a lawyer who works as a consultant for Goldman Sachs. Thank you.
The Brookings report says very specifically, number one, don't tell anybody. If we tell anybody, it will shatter the fabric of our civilization.
Another pyramid with similar construction, 100 kilometers south of the Band of Peace, is known as the Maidum Pyramid.
Today, when you walk around Maidum Pyramid, you will find out that on the ground is a coat of black color flint. And the evidence is this. When you pick up one of these flints, you see it's black at the top and the bottom is a different color. And there is a catastrophe happening over there. I want you to look at the ground. You can see a coat of smoke affect the flints on the ground.
Maidum is not the only place that looks as though there was an explosion. Look at this giant crack in the solid stone of the Red Pyramid. It would have taken a huge force to crack the solid rock. There is a crack in the subterranean chamber in the Great Pyramid. and there is another one in the Grand Gallery. There are weird chemical burns in the Red Pyramid. What could have caused these? Old photos of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid show the stone as black. The room was cleaned and restored, and now we can see the walls are pink granite. The granite sarcophagus has a broken corner, and the wall next to it has a giant crack. What kind of force could have caused this? Is the Department of Antiquities erasing evidence under the guise of restoration? Where did we get the history of Egypt?
A couple of years ago, I hired a digital artist named Jack Andrews to render this two-dimensional image in 3D for us. And this is what he came up with. This is what the platform of or the base of the Meru diagram looks like rendered in 3D. And so I think that it's fairly remarkable that you can take a 2nd century drawing and render it in 3D using a computer and come up with something that is so profoundly technological appearing. Here's the very top of it. Jack said it gave him a lot of difficulty trying to render this in 3D. He couldn't figure out what this cone actually was. But what I think it is the same snow cone or cone that Sitchin thinks is the Shemcraft of the Anunnaki. And I think that what ultimately the Shemcraft of the Anunnaki is not a Apollo command module. I think it's actually a warp craft. We noticed something very interesting that Sitchin omitted from his drawing is that there was a pillar that was placed underground underneath this cone-shaped object. And the pillar that's placed underneath the ground is actually this right here, which is none other than the Pillar of Osiris, which is potentially some kind of a particle accelerator, a device the Egyptians said could drill holes in space. And here it is perfectly present in this diagram. Back to Jack's drawing of the apex of the Meru diagram. I think that, again, what we're actually seeing in the 2nd century diagram is a warp craft being spit out of a Stargate. And that, in fact, the apex of that diagram and this warp craft designed by NASA, or proposed by NASA, are actually describing the same thing. And so when we see Inanna standing in front of this Mer device that's mounted to the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babel is the gate. It's the particle accelerator. And what she's witnessing here is this device right here. And this pine cone-shaped object at the top here is this right here. And what it in fact is a warp craft. And what the Anunnaki possessed was this technology of opening the gates of the gods, and that's what's buried 20 feet beneath the sands of Baghdad. It is the secrets of the ancient gates of the Anunnaki.
Then Kigog anointed his 7 braids and beard with oil. He just stood before 100,000 of them, all in the high place of Baal of the earth, and looking over his warriors and kingdom, he screamed with a voice that all Rephaim heard, "For Baal of the earth and for the loss of the moonchild, we go to war." And when the moon was full, next war broke out between Og and Nimrod's kingdoms. Og and his giants fought against the circumcised, and the circumcised and Nimrod fought back. The Rephaim were driven on by the death of the moonchild, and their hatred of circumcision hardened their resolve. These are the Rephaim of significant stature that fought with King Og on the field of battle of the 100,000 giants. Anak, the keeper of the bodies before Bel, Anak, whose dark one shrouded over him with unspeakable darkness, Anak, who spoke the incantation to raise the dead, Anak, who worshipped Mot in secret, Anak, the transcriber of the first chapters of this very book, Anak, who cut himself and shaved the front of his head, Anak, who stood between Og and Nimrod and was then cut down by the circumcised, Anak, who wounded Nimrod's genitals a second time. Azath, the temple priest for Baal of the moon, Azath with blackened eyes, who rode a great beast into battle. Azath, the priest who was the creator, the driver and chaser. Azath, who weaved the bones of these smaller cells into his beard. Azath, who ate the unnatural creeping things that did not have fins or scales, and the beasts that chewed the cud but did not have cloven hooves. Azath, whose dark ones moved objects around him. Azath, whose potions and spells protected the Rephaim on the field of battle. Azath's army was 1,000 giants. Melkam, the cannibal, who had eaten the dead who were tied to trees where the dark ones gather. Melkam, the treasurer in the house of Baal of the moon. Abominable Melkam, who showed partially and took the bribes that blind the eyes of the wise and twist the words of the honorable. Melkam, who at times was possessed by dark ones that threw him into the water or the fire trying to kill him. Melkam, who sang praises to Baal of the moon as he was surrounded by circumcised Nephilim, and run through Melkam's army was of 1,000 giants. Tarshan, who hunted in the great waters and tamed Leviathan. Tarshan, blood servant and warden of the blood pits of Baal of the earth. Tarshan, who killed the circumcised Nephilim on the field of battle by crushing skulls with hammers. Tarshan, who plundered Nimrod's stores and took all of his smaller cells and livestock. Tarshan, whose face had been scarred by a mighty beast. Tarshan, who used the dark ones to read the minds and hearts of others. Tarshan's army was 500 giants. This is the 100,000 giant war as scribed by both Anak, the keeper of the bodies before Baal, and Anzal, the slayer of the smaller cells before Baal. Now the uncircumcised Rephaim came to join forces with King Og, arriving from the hot and cold lands of elsewhere. All the dispersed uncircumcised Rephaim from the four corners of the world, they came. When the uncircumcised Rephaim had arrived, King Og anointed his hair and beard with oil. He just stood before 100,000 of them, all in the high place of Baal of the earth. And looking over his warriors and kingdom, he spoke with a loud voice, saying, "Thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap. For the harvest of the earth is ripe. For Baal of the earth, for the loss of the moonchild, we go to war," he said. His voice was strong as that of harpists, musicians, pipers, and of trumpeters. Baal of the moon then spoke through King Og's smaller self-sorceresses. They spoke to Ogias, Ornias, Anzal, and Anak, the keeper of the bodies before Baal, saying, "Take 50 giants, one from each army, and command each one of the 50 to carry a stone as large as he can upon his shoulders and lay them at the entrance to the fields of battle. This is where your army will sleep for the night before battle tomorrow." The Rephaim did as Baal of the moon had instructed them. 50 of the leaders of the armies carried large stones on their shoulders and piled them near the entrance to the field of the battle. Ogias, Ornias, and Anak, the keeper of the bodies before Baal, each moved the 50 stones to the center of the entrance to the field of battle, between Og and Nimrod's kingdoms. The stones were to stay there to this very day. Anak then spoke to the army of 100,000 and said, "These stones are assigned to you so that when the smaller cells ask you, 'What do these stones mean to you?' You can tell them, the circumcised Nephilim were cut off from the kingdom of Og and from Baal of the moon. Therefore these stones will always be memorial for the uncircumcised Rephaim forever. King Og's army set up a camp. The giants then celebrated with food and drink served by Stolas, Typhoeus, and their 2,500 giants. After the armies of King Og were satisfied with the marrow, the fatness, the bread, the cakes, the bunches of raisins, and red wine, they pushed their plates away and fell into a deep slumber. And Baal of the moon gave King Og's army a spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see and ears that they should not hear, until the day of warfare. And Baal of the moon passed over the 100,000 uncircumcised Rephaim warriors continually through the night. Baal of the moon soothed their dark ones, calming them, which allowed the uncircumcised Rephaim to continue their heavy slumber. The bleeding fingers of Baal of the sun then carved the light of dawn before them. On that day of the full moon, the uncircumcised awoke, and the day star rose in their hearts. Now on that morning of the full moon, the leaders of King Og's armies had gathered about his tent and awaited wisdom and instruction to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity, for the world was set to change on that day. And King Og stood at the entrance to his tent, and he prayed loudly. The 100,000 giant war. And war broke out between Og's and King Nimrod's kingdoms. Og and his giants marched across the desert, that is damnation, toward the circumcised Nephilim. And the circumcised Nephilim and Nimrod marched to meet them. And this uncircumcised Nephilim released the elephants, rhinoceros, great beasts of old, and the creeping things onto the field of battle. The circumcised Nephilim brought no beasts whatsoever. So the Rephaim fought the war and acted wisely concerning it, and each giant girded his weapons of war, and fought according to all that Baal of the earth, moon, sun, stars, celestial bodies, and Mot had told them. Each of the uncircumcised Rephaim killed 100 or more of the circumcised Nephilim. There has been no violence likened to the 100,000 giant war before or since. And water began to fall from the sky, and all who marched were wet, and their weapons were made heavy because of it. The uncircumcised Rephaim, whose minds were full of violence, were driven on by the death of the moon-child, and their hatred of circumcision, which strengthened their violent resolve. The circumcised Nephilim also had minds of violence and anger about the moon-child, worth going to war over, and the water mixed with the ground of the fields of battle, which were called damnation, and the mud became thick and slowed them some. The uncircumcised walked forward to the circumcised, and the circumcised walked forward to the uncircumcised. The Rephaim walked upon the field of battle, which is called damnation, as if in the midst of the sea, and the waters fell upon them. And to their right hand and on their left, the giants carried their swords, axes, drivers, and chasers, and lances, and led their beasts of old to kill on the field of battle. The fountains of the deep opened, also the windows of heaven opened wider, and rain fell, unrestrained upon the field of battle. And the waters returned to the earth continually, and they were not abated. This was the very beginning of the 40 nights and days of rain, the prophecy that had been foretold by the priests of Baal, of the sun, who were as follows: Happus, Dantalion, Valak, Siriti, Person, and Dikarabit. The mud then became as a thick, cold darkness that swallowed at the Rephaim's feet as they marched. The anger and hatred grew within King Og's army against the circumcised Nephilim, for Baal of the moon sent his wrath in this war against the circumcised nation. Baal of the moon hardened King Og's heart so that he would not lose the war. Baal of the moon then strengthened King Og and his giants to take the plunder, and to strip off the spoil from the temples and the dwellings, and to trample the circumcised Nephilim like beggars in the streets. Now Kotos blew the beast's horn, and his army of 2,000 giants began to chant, saying, "The battle belongs to King Og." Koto's army then blew their horns, and all 100,000 giants of Og's army continued the chant. The blackening ground shook and grew wetter still as a marsh of riverbed. The field of battle became heavy as when one is sent to me with heavy tidings, and the rain poured with more violence upon the earth. King Og's army continued, and the great beasts of old marched with them. The dark ones leapt from uncircumcised Rephaim to uncircumcised Rephaim, and there was much darkness and spiritual terror on both sides of the field of battle. The dark ones covered the uncircumcised Rephaim with large whirlwinds that circled and climbed into the rain above them. The sky then cracked with lightning, and the thunder was heard throughout both kingdoms. The rain poured onto the field of battle as water poured from a pitcher. The dark ones floated across the water between the armies. Varus's dark ones went across and entered the circumcised Nephilim, learnt of their battle secrets, and returned them to him. Briareus's dark ones followed, who entered the circumcised Nephilim and confused their ways so that they wounded one another. Amok's dark ones went across the desert of damnation and wounded and disemboweled the circumcised Nephilim. Crackus's dark ones broke the bones of many of the circumcised Nephilim on the front lines of the field of battle. Gigas's of curved limbs then conjured a powerful dark one which crossed to the circumcised Nephilim and entered Mulim the Nephilim, who was a mighty warrior in Nimrod's kingdom. Mulim then turned and killed 1,000 of his own circumcised Nephilim, while under the power of Gigas's dark one. Then Crestel, whose dark one made his army invisible, led the charge to the circumcised Nephilim. Crestel led with his army, whom the dark ones made invisible, so that all that could be seen was splashing of their feet, and all that could be heard was the chanting. The battle belongs to King Og. Now Crestel's invisible army attacked the circumcised Nephilim throat and groin and divided the circumcised Nephilim battle lines in half. The circumcised Nephilim were filled with great fear because of Crestel's invisible army, and they cried out, "I hear the uncircumcised, but I see no one." Crestel's army then relentlessly killed the most circumcised Nephilim. The 100,000 giant war until their dark ones left them. Now Sanbar, who did not respect Anak, the keeper of the body, stood by the stones that the Rephaim had collected the day before as a memorial unto them. Sanbar then commanded the strongest 50 in his army of 500 giants to join him, and they threw the stones over Crestel and the uncircumcised Rephaim. The stones fell and crushed many of the circumcised Nephilim. In the rain, Sanbar, whose dark one spoke and turned through him, then led his army onto the field of battle to kill and defile the wounded. Then Virak, the perfect, whose visage was beautiful, led his army of 500 uncircumcised Rephaim into battle. After many of the uncircumcised Rephaim had been killed, Virak looked to the sun and called out, "Have I not served you with my moving large voice, O Baal of the sun? Show me your hatred for the circumcised." And rocks of fire fell from heaven with the rain, crushing many circumcised Nephilim. King Og stood at the entrance to the field of battle with his voice of destruction that the entire field of battle heard, commanding, "All giants with floating beasts shall ride forward into battle." Now Nimrod and his army of circumcised giants did not have floating beasts or animals of warfare. Through his army were as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. The ranks of the uncircumcised Rephaim, warring in the rain and muck, then killed their closest Nephilim so the ranks could be opened. Now the ground shook as the uncircumcised Rephaim connected with their floating beasts and galloped forward into battle, eviscerating circumcised Nephilim as they went. Arrows and swords did not penetrate or harm them. Skiron connected with his floating beast and became as a hairy elephant with tusks and horns. Skiron, the blood drinker, entered the battle with 500 giants and many trained beasts. The trained beasts gored and stood upon the circumcised Nephilim, pinning them to the ground until the giants under Skiron's command killed them or they drowned. Skiron killed and mauled 400 circumcised Nephilim that day. Then Meyer lifted a mountainside and threw it upon the circumcised Nephilim, killing 300 of them. Meyer then connected with his floating beast and became as a rhinoceros with many horns. Meyer, who while connected, screamed, "A whip for the beast, a bridle for the Nephilim, and a rod for Nimrod's back." Meyer's army of 500 uncircumcised Rephaim followed him and slaughtered scores of circumcised Nephilim with no fear, as butchers slaughter dull beasts for meat. And Meyer and his army were responsible for a very great slaughter, for there fell of the circumcised 1,000 giants.
All the wood in this room is from Russia. It's Russian walnut. The altar in the middle of the room is black marble quarried from Lake Champlain in New York. And the Hebrew writing in the middle says, "God said, let there be light, and there was light."
So there's 3 with 1 missing, it looks like. Is this the
I don't know exactly.
north, south, west, and the east is missing, or?
No, that would be the east.
That would be the east?
Because that's north.
Right.
Right. I don't know why that is missing, actually.
I asked him why there were only 3 lights at the altar, and he said he wasn't too sure why, but there are 3 because 1 represents the east, 1 represents the west, 1 represents the south, but in Masonry, the north is the place of darkness. And of course, according to the Bible tells us that the north is where God resides. Masonic Holy Bible.
When was this built, the building? 1911, it was started and it was finished in 1915. This was the architect's first major building. He went on to do the National Archives, National Gallery of Art, and the Jefferson Memorial. The snakes represent chaos.
This guy Shackleton goes down there on the and I think I put this in my original blog. He goes down there on the name of the ship is the Nimrod. He goes down there on the Nimrod, and it's called the Nimrod Expedition. I'm like, seriously? Okay, Nimrod's goal was to reach into heaven, right? Yeah, the Nimrod Expedition. So you can click on the link I got there and read all about the Nimrod Expedition, British Antarctic Expedition, otherwise known as the Nimrod Expedition. And it was on the name of the ship was the Nimrod right here. Okay. Nimrod was trying to reach into heaven by going up. Could it be that these guys are trying to go out, try to find the ground floor? I don't know, but I mean, why do you, and this is what really got me, is they did so in 1908. 1908. I'm like, really? 1908? Seriously? 1908 is when Nimrod was born. According to my other, let me see, what I put in here. This is one of my other blogs. Yeah. Okay. The 350 post-flood years of Noah's life. This is a chart I did last year, and the follow-up chart, the Nimrod-Abraham timeline. Nimrod was born in 1908 AM, or years since creation. And then 1908, see, 1907 to 1909, well, that's 1908. Nimrod went to Antarctica. I'm like, I mean, you can't write this stuff. I mean, wow. Okay, so they go down there. A whole bunch of people are, you know, from that point on, once they start finding ways to get through the ice to get there, more and more expeditions and better ships are built and used to get there. Then you get to Admiral Byrd.
Obviously, Herman Oberth and Werner von Braun and others have made reference to so many times until they passed away. So all this stuff is a matter of record. And when you put all the records together, it points to this. There is some entity or group of entities that are sentient, that means obviously the thinking, that have advanced technology and that basically give orders to the religious and political leaders of our day.
Azazel, the translators of the Greek Septuagint understood the Hebrew term as meaning the sent away. Azazel also being attributed as meaning scapegoat.
Ultiem geworden. Maar dat is allemaal omdat de mensen, zeg maar, niet opstaan.
Nee.
Niet beseffen wat de werkelijkheid is.
En geprogrammeerd zijn, want durf maar eens te zeggen dat je tegen het sionisme bent. Dan ben je antisemiet, dan ben je... dat proberen ze...
Het negatieve, je mag zeggen het kwaad, het Luciferiaanse, het satanisme, hoe je het wil noemen. Het is een werkelijke entiteit. Ik ben werkelijk erachter gekomen dat wat ook in zo'n Bijbel staat, en het staat niet alleen in de Bijbel, het staat in zoveel boeken. Er is werkelijk een shift geweest, een afscheiding geweest van de lichtmanifestatie. Waarin eigenlijk een club voor zichzelf is begonnen. En een haat, een intense haat heeft. Een kwaadheid heeft. Die maar heel weinig mensen werkelijk op waarde durven in te schatten. Want het is een allesvernietigende kracht die ons haat.
Ja.
Die haat de schepping, die haat het leven. En zal er ook alles aan doen om ons mensen te vernietigen. En hoe doe je dat? Door ze uit elkaar te houden. Verdeel en heers, dat klopt. De mensheid is namelijk de manifestatie van het licht. Dat is de werkelijke creatie. Zolang je die maar gescheiden houdt in allerlei zaken, zoals politieke partijen, kleurtjes waar we op afgerekend worden, noem alles maar op. Dan zorg je ervoor dat jouw grootste vijand, vanuit het Luciferiaans gezien, niet tot zijn volle potentie komt, niet tot zijn volle kracht komt. Niet kan gaan staan, want op het moment dat dat gebeurt, dan verdwijnt het. Dan verdwijnt die hele brulboei, dat monster, het monster van meer, die verdwijnt.